From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. The city of Orno, Minnesota is located in the west suburbs of Minneapolis. Nestled by Lake Minnetonka, it's famously known as the Lakeshore City. It's home to 8,500 people who treasure its tranquil lakeside lifestyle, year-round recreational activities, and serene atmosphere. However, the mood of local government there can be far from tranquil or serene, and not just during an election season. Our guest today is first-term Orno Council member Alisa Benson, and we're going to talk about what motivated her to run for office in the first place and what she's learned so far about working in a governing process that has been responsible sometimes for community uproar, confusion, and division. Council member Alisa Benson, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much. So, I understand that you and your husband moved to Orno, about 16 years ago? Tell us, why did you move there in the first place? Where did you move from?
We moved from further in the city of Minneapolis, where we were living by lakes. There's a lot of them here in Minnesota. And at that time, we had one child and another one on the way. And we were looking for a community where we could raise our children that had a great school system and a lot of open space to enjoy.
Were you working outside the home at that time? Were you a community activist when you first got there? Were you politically involved at all when you first arrived in Orno?
Maybe a community activist in the making. I think I was always somebody who was aware of what was going on around me. And that didn't mean that I was doing something full time at the time. I was raising kids or a child with another one on the way. I was not working full time, and I've done part-time jobs over the years, lots of different ones, but I was not working full time then. What I would say is I was always somebody, and am to this day, who really values the idea of understanding how to give back. And that goes back to my parents, which is another story, but somebody who always understood that my place is one that is connected to many, many others.
Tell us the story of your parents.
I was raised in Southern California. So I am a transplant, although I've lived here a very, very long time, on and off over the years. I come from a long line of educators and people who are lifelong learners. My mother was a teacher. My mother was just one in a long line. My father was a military pilot in the Navy and then became a career pilot for a national airline. And we grew up, again, very much an outdoor family, enjoying lots of things with the outdoors. But the theme through what we did a lot of was just the idea of, again, how are we connected to other people? What are we as a family and as individuals doing to give back? In terms of the community activism piece, both my parents instilled in me from a very young age that it matters how we are in the world. It matters what we do. And I'll tell you a story about my mother, who, when I was a young person in elementary school, most schools have some type of family faculty club or parent teachers association. It was that type of a thing. And at the time, there was a gentleman who had been president of this organization for some time. And as his term was coming to an end, he kind of looked around the room of this gathering of parents and said, "Does anyone object to me being a president again?" And I remember her telling this story, and she said he was sort of putting his feet up on the desk, arms behind his head. "Does anyone object to me being president again?" And she said to me at the time, knowing who he was and what he had done for the school, she said, "I thought it was time for a change." And so she said, "Well, I think it's time for change. I'd like to see somebody else run for this position." And she ended up doing it, and she ended up being nominated and winning that position. So the idea was, just because somebody's been doing something a long time, change can be okay.
Alisa, I was going to ask you this question later, but I think this comes up right now. I was going to ask you what you think of as your core leadership values. But based on the story that you just said, I think I pulled three things from it. You've talked about giving back, connecting with others, and being willing to speak up and not stand by, at least when you see something that needs to be done. Did I just encapsulate your values from those stories?
You did. And I'll clarify that speaking up for me does not equate to being a fly in the ointment, because sometimes speaking up can be conflated with being difficult. And I think there's a difference there. Speaking up means I have something to add, and I don't subscribe to the idea of going along to get along, because I don't think that's how we innovate well. And I also don't think that's how we ensure that all voices are heard.
So let's fast forward a little bit. In 2022, you decided to run for city council after what you described to me as a community uproar over plans for an extreme build process at a historic lakeshore park. And so I have a two-part question. I want to hear, what was the extreme build process? What was that all about? But what I first want to ask you is, was the decision to run something that was like a slow awakening for you? Or do you just bolt up right in the middle of the night and say, damn it, I need to run. I need to give them what for? What was the process of deciding that this was important to you?
That's really interesting that you put it that way. The process for me did start a number of years ago, but it was a slow burn. It was not something where there's an overnight, hey, I know what I'm going to do. It's precognitive. It's back there in your mind in a way, moving around as you're learning about the city more. And for myself, despite being a longtime resident, I, like most people, was not heavily involved in the day-to-day governance process. I don't know many people that are, unless they are ex-elected officials or people, for various reasons with their work or otherwise. So I was informed.
You weren't regularly going to City Hall. You weren't sitting in on study sessions and paying attention?
I was not. I was paying attention insofar as I understood the way things worked. I understand who my council members were and that sort of thing. But unless, as with most cities, unless there's an issue that becomes highly visible, most people are paying their taxes and going on about their lives. Now, that changed for me in part due to the issue that you raised a moment ago, which is that we have a number of parks in our city. And this one in particular that brought about this issue was one that is, it's historic. The land was gifted to the city by a family in the past who intended for it to be used as a natural swimming beach and really a natural area. And again, with my background and everything I've talked about, we understand that for me, that natural and open spaces is really something that I value, and the community does as well. So with this particular issue, it was one where there was a proposed recreational facility or a rowing facility that was going to potentially build a clubhouse and other sort of infrastructure at this small area. And I think rowing's fantastic. I'd taken rowing classes in the past, but myself and other folks in the community recognized that this process that was going through the Orno City Council seemed to be not, running in a way that felt like it was listening to community voices and not understanding all the inner workings of how council processes went. For me, listening to residents and community members is very, very important. And so, yes, like many cities, there was an upheaval and city council meetings that involved lots of comment about this issue.
Lisa, help us understand, what was the thing that felt inappropriate in some way?
What was alarming is that by the time I became aware of the issue, and I was amongst others who spoke about this issue, it seemed like the process had already gotten quite far down the line. Now, that may not be unusual for folks who are not paying attention to what's going on in city government, but the issue here was that it was a very, very large building structure meant to be built on a quite small plot of land that would essentially change the fundamental character of this shoreline and this swimming beach that had remained quite natural up to that point. So it felt at odds with the surrounding. It also felt at odds with the intention of the folks who had donated the land in the past, the family. And the process seemed to lack a good amount of community input and sort of listening along the way. It felt like it had gotten rolling and snowballing quite quickly. And it caused the community to really have concern that this beloved historic shoreline or beachfront would be changed in a way that would forever change the character of that area.
Is this just history repeating itself? Is this you playing the role of your mom where someone is saying, does anyone mind if I put this big building here? And you said, well, yes, I mind.
That's a good way of putting it. Yes. And here's what I realized through that process. My voice as a resident mattered. My voice and the voice of many, many others who spoke at these council meetings mattered. And here's what I've learned through that process and also now as a council member is that there can be a tendency, regardless of the issue, for individuals to imagine that they won't make a difference, that speaking into the microphone, giving their public comment is just perfunctory somehow. But I don't believe that it is. And it's especially powerful when you meet other people who share that idea that contribution and showing up is something through letter form or whatever it is at a meeting is something that matters. And it's very, very important. It's our right. And so, yes, while it wasn't comfortable necessarily, I think folks learn, and I learned through that process, that it takes something that is going to motivate you in order to do it. Most people don't want to show up at a meeting and spend hours, waiting and giving public comments. But in this case, it mattered. And ultimately the project was scrapped, for lack of a better way of putting it. And that said, I think the community is fantastic, the rowing community. It just wasn't the right project at the right time at that location. But I hear what you're saying. And yes, sometimes it takes a long time to realize some of the lessons your parents have taught you in life. Hers was a good one, and it stuck with me. And it does get easier. What I would say, like anything, it's a muscle that you flex. And as you do that, it becomes a little bit easier over time.
It sounds like because you had your mother's example, that your ability to step up in that moment, it doesn't sound like that was a fearful moment. And I don't know what you are like as a person, whether you're an introvert or anything, but it sounds like you just had the confidence that when something was of concern, that of course it was your right, your responsibility, and your place to step up to the opportunity and say that.
Yes. I don't think it was, I think at the end of the day, it becomes a choice of recognizing, well, I could say nothing. I could accept what's happening and just say, nothing I do is going to make a difference. Or I could say, I do have the right to speak up. Maybe it's not something I'm used to doing, but I am going to use my voice. And I would rather be the sort of person after the fact, regardless of what happens in any situation, that has chosen the latter and has chosen in that moment to say, I'm not going to stand by. Everybody gets to decide for themselves, but I want to know, regardless of the outcome, that I've done everything that I'm capable of in order to affect change.
Do you think there's a part of this story that pays forward? Do you think your children have observed you doing this and thus they have internalized that lesson for themselves as a result?
I'd like to think so. I have 2 teenagers, one of whom is graduating here this year from high school. And children watch everything we do. I know I did with my parents, and the lessons that I learned from my folks, and likely the ones my sons are learning from me, are the ones oftentimes that are unspoken. What they see is, they see their mom going to meetings, becoming educated about issues, and taking time to connect with people, and mostly to listen, a lot of listening. But they also understand that even when it's not easy for me, I use my voice. And I do believe that over time, that has made an impact on them, because they know they're capable of doing the same, whether or not in life they choose, whatever they choose. I want to impart on them that it matters and you get one voice, and yes, you can use it. You can use it. It's your choice when and how, but it's in you. It's in you.
Your kids are very fortunate to have your example, as you are fortunate to have your mother's example. I speak with a lot of community leaders where the act of stepping up is fearful and hard, and built into it is the sense that they don't belong and that they have to overcome that. So it's refreshing. It's important to hear that this was handed to you by your mom and that you've handed to your kids as well.
And I appreciate that. She's no longer living. And I will tell you that I drew a lot of inspiration from her during my campaign. It's not easy to run for elected office. And there are times when things seem, especially difficult, because they are. And so I credit her and my father with giving me a lot of skills that I didn't know were skills at the time. And I must now, if you don't mind, give my father a bit of credit. He is still living. And I want to tell you the story that inspired, because it speaks to what you just said about sometimes it's not easy to feel like the one who's left out. He was raised in a family that had certain convictions about religion and other things. And so there came a point in his life as a young teenager where he was required to go up, during the service and pledge, next steps or whatever the situation was with that service, and sort of pledge to continue on along a certain line. And during this process, each of these other young men were asked the question, do you do this? Do you do this? Well, he had some doubts and felt like his life was taking him in a different direction, which was okay. He wanted to join the Navy and do other things. And so when it came time for him with the whole audience and everyone there, his parents, well, are you going to take this next step and do this thing? And he sat down. He did not go up and stand amongst the other young people who were taking this pledge to continue on their studies and whatnot. And that was very hard for him. And as he said to me at the time, when he would tell the story, suddenly I found myself in a minority of one. And I remember thinking at the time that must have been really hard, but I didn't understand how hard it was until I myself have found that to be the case in some of my own work. So speaking up is important, but it's also important to be able, for the right reasons, again, not looking to be a fly in the ointment, but understand that it's okay to be in a minority of one, as long as you're doing it with your research and, your convictions in mind, respectfully.
Yeah, I love your point. And I think if I would offer a friendly amendment to it, I would say that the term seems to be secure in a party of one, that it's okay to be yourself, but it's also okay to be secure in knowing that you're standing up for something that is right from your perspective.
That is absolutely the case. It doesn't make it easy, but I also think it's very, very important.
Alisa, you opened the door to something. I'm going to walk in, but if it's too personal, tell me and I'll gladly walk back out. You had shared with me that the process of running for office was intensely personal, and it challenged you physically, intellectually, and emotionally. Do you mind sharing how?
Well, first of all, my community has some very, very long driveways, and I found myself doing a lot of door knocking and getting a lot of steps. So when I say physically, it was a lot of work. And I was doing this at a time that my community had not seen choice when it came to candidates for some time, meaning that the administration that was in place at the time, there were 3 individuals, myself included, running for 2 council seats. And the other 2 folks who were running had the endorsement of the sitting mayor. So I was the candidate who did not have an endorsement and did not have either name recognition or funding or all those things that make it a lot easier when you're running to be able to do that process. I was somebody, going back to your question from earlier, who had found myself announcing a candidacy that I had not considered seriously doing in the past, but I recognized there was a point at which I needed to step forward, and there I did so. And I had been given a lot of support from people after that incident I talked about with that build project. You start talking to other people who are involved, and my name was, I was being talked to by people. You seem like you're interested. Would you consider running? But until you do it, it's hard to know what that's going to take out of you. And so when I announced, it was not something that I considered or planned for a very long period of time. I did it because, again, I thought it was important to speak up regardless of what happened. And my speaking up meant running for the seat. So when I did it, it was not something that was well considered or well planned, but I had conviction that what I was going to offer and bring to this office was needed. So when I say that it was physically, emotionally, and intellectually challenged, I had to learn a lot of things about how to campaign. I was making up, a website, mailers, figuring out door knocking, trying to get campaign funding, all in the process of campaigning. So for being somebody who's new to that, the learning curve was steep.
So you've been in office about a year and a half, right?
Yes.
And I take it that the governing process has not been all unicorns and rainbows. So I just want to ask if you could help us understand the roots of contention, especially in a beautiful community of just 8,500 people. Is it about different visions for the future? Is it about different values? Is it about scarce resources? Is it personality?
People want choices, and people want to be heard. And I believe that fundamentally the thread that connects the current discord in our community is an ongoing issue of not having enough ability as a community to be heard. And I think fundamentally, as I've said before, the responsibility on council is to listen and to understand what it is your community wants so that you can take your community in the right direction. It doesn't mean that we as leaders don't have certain ideas about what we value, but those ideas only are as good as we are moving through our community to understand if our idea of something is in line with our residents who pay the taxes and to whom we work for the residents.
Alisa, as we were preparing for our conversation, you gave me a list of some of the practical, actionable lessons. You said, recognize that skills you don't consider marketable are the very ones that may be needed in your community. Know your worth.
Know your worth. Those are my 3 words. And I say that to others and I say it to myself. And it matters that you're doing both. And the interesting thing is, when I started my process of campaigning and working in this capacity as an elected official, I realized it's some of those soft skills that people are soft sciences that come in most handy, which are empathy, listening skills, the ability to sit and watch things unfolding without a need to react right away, to problem solve it right away. Some of these skills, I believe, are devalued. And sometimes it is a case of people who are more than happy to jump in, talk more, problem solve, get right, that you're not able to learn as much or to allow things to unfold and to watch what's happening and understand where you want to go before you just start charging in there. And that's what I see in my ability to connect with residents, is that they see in me somebody who is willing to slow down and to take the time and to listen and to connect, because it matters a great deal when you're looking at complex problems. Because as I say, city problems are people problems at their core. And coming into this work from a field of working with people has been a real asset.
You're describing something that sounds like learning to hold space and learning to be comfortable in your discomfort for a little bit. I sense that you've learned this from something in your personal life as well. What's that?
Well, for a long time now, I should say, I've practiced yoga. And I think people, when they hear that, they, oh, okay, I can't put my, bend down and touch the floor. I can't do this. You'll hear a lot of can'ts when you hear the word yoga. And Yoga has nothing to do with what your body's able to do. The practice of yoga is about union and balance. And so when I talk about the ability to sit in discomfort, which you just mentioned, which is part of the practice of yoga, it's the idea of, regardless of what's happening, are you able to sit with something or to be in something, even though it's uncomfortable, and be okay with that? Because you'll notice sometimes when things are getting heated or when there's difficulty, there's fight or flight. People are going to run or they're going to get angry or this or that. But the ability to sit in it, sort of sitting through the storm, watching what's happening, taking note of it, not judging it, receiving information, that type of thing is a real asset. And it also has allowed me over time, this practice, to understand that I can do hard things. And again, it's not about what your body can do. Even the sense of just sitting still for a few minutes, that can be really challenging for people, but you can do it. There's a beginning and a middle and the end. And I think over time, that ability to have balance and stillness really matters. It's really informed what I do with my work. And I didn't, say this quote, but I know we've likely heard it. A calm mind is a powerful mind. And I think if you can be somebody who can sit through discomfort, not react, and be responsible for your own emotions through a process, even when it's hard, it helps everybody around you.
That's really meaningful for you, and I appreciate that. If you were going to send a message to yourself back in time, just like 2 years ago, to whatever was right before you made the decision to run for public office, what's the message you would send to yourself?
You can do it. You're a regular person and you can do it. I think there's a lot of doubt that creeps in once you put your hand up or speak up or stand out. And the message is you can do it, but not alone. It's not about being a lone wolf. It's about a community. So I would just say you can do it and let others in and let them help.
We live in a time of profound divisiveness. So I want to finally ask you, what gives you hope for the future?
Young people. For one, it's something that I don't see a lot, but I absolutely think it's fantastic when younger people, whether or not they can vote, attend meetings and want to learn. I had the opportunity to be interviewed by some high school students about a variety of issues and my thoughts on them as an elected official. And they're so insightful, so skilled, and wanting to do a great job and wanting to understand the world around them, including their local government. And it is young people that are inspiring to me. And it is young people from whom I draw a lot of strength and who I also want to welcome in. And I think if they only knew how much influence they have, on people like me who make decisions, because I'm always thinking about how to leave everything in a better place for the people who are coming behind us.
Alisa Benson, it has been wonderful to talk to you. And I thank you so much for being open and vulnerable and sharing your story. And good luck to you and good luck to your council. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And I thank you for all the work that you're doing. It is much appreciated and needed. Thank you.
Again, I sincerely thank Councilmember Alisa Benson of Orno, Minnesota. This episode was produced by Kerry Lengel and edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, comment, or story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or podcast at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.